The signs that God may be trying to remove someone from your life. We all know that God has a divine purpose for our lives. And there are times when He needs to move people in and out of our journey to fulfill that purpose. Sometimes it's not about getting rid of someone, but rather making space for the next season of growth that God has prepared for us. In our journey through life, there will be people, some close to us, some not so close, that God allows to enter, and others He allows to exit. But how do you know when it's God doing the removing? How do you recognize it? Today we'll explore 3 signs that God is trying to remove someone from your life. Pay attention, because these signs can guide you toward understanding God's plan for your future. There are times in our lives when everything seems to be at odds with our inner peace. The relationships we cherish, the people we trust, begin to bring us an inexplicable sense of discomfort. It's not just an occasional disagreement or a bad day. It's a consistent undercurrent of tension that you cannot ignore. This is one of the clearest signs that God is trying to remove someone from your life. At first, the conflict may appear trivial, misunderstandings, small differences of opinion, maybe even a few disagreements over insignificant things. But over time, this tension intensifies. What once seemed like a casual difference becomes a recurring theme. You start to feel unsettled in the presence of that person. Their words, their actions, the way they behave. Something just doesn't sit right with you anymore. The peace you once had when you were together is gone. It's as if something in your spirit is telling you that this relationship is no longer healthy or aligned with your destiny. This tension is not simply a personal discomfort. It's often a divine sign. In Proverbs 13:20 we read, "He who walks with the wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm." When conflict and tension continue to rise without resolution, it's God's way of showing you that your current circle is hindering your growth. This is not a judgment on the other person. It's an invitation to step into a higher place of peace and purpose. It's important to understand that not every disagreement is a signal to end a relationship. Sometimes growth comes through working through conflict. But there are situations when the conflict itself becomes so persistent, so draining, that you begin to question your own stability. It begins to affect your ability to hear from God, to focus on your purpose, and to live in peace. God uses these moments as a red flag, pointing out that this person or relationship is not meant to walk with you into the next season of your life. Take the story of Sarah. Sarah had been best friends with Mia since childhood. They shared secrets, supported each other through hard times, and even dreamed together of their futures. But as they entered adulthood, Sarah began to notice a shift. Mia, once supportive, now seemed to belittle her dreams. When Sarah shared an accomplishment, Mia would downplay it, offering only shallow praise. When Sarah faced setbacks, Mia would criticize rather than encourage, reminding her of all the times she had failed in the past. The relationship, which had once been a source of joy, was now filled with subtle insults and passive-aggressive comments. The more Sarah tried to maintain peace, the more frustrated she became. The constant conflict in their friendship began to drain her. Sarah prayed for clarity, asking God why the relationship had shifted so dramatically. Slowly, through quiet moments of reflection, she began to sense that this relationship, which had once helped her grow, was now holding her back. Mia's jealousy, rooted in insecurity, was preventing Sarah from fully stepping into the future God had prepared for her. The tension was no longer just a product of their personalities. It was a sign of something deeper, an obstacle to Sarah's progress. Eventually, Sarah had to make the painful decision to let go of the friendship. It wasn't an easy decision. Sarah wrestled with guilt, with the fear of losing a lifelong friend, but in her heart she knew that God was calling her to let go. The unresolved tension, the constant conflict were symptoms of a deeper misalignment in their paths. As soon as Sarah took that step, a sense of peace flooded her spirit. She realized that sometimes even the people we love most are not meant to walk with us into the next chapter of our lives. Conflict, when it becomes unresolvable, is a clear sign from God that the relationship is no longer serving your higher purpose. When we resist God's leading, we hold on to relationships that drain us. We allow the conflict to cloud our judgment and stifle our potential. But when we trust God's wisdom, He can show us the way forward, even when it involves painful separations. When conflict seems endless, and no matter how much effort you put into mending things, the situation only worsens, it is essential to pause and listen to what God is telling you. You are not called to live in a constant state of turmoil, not when God has peace and purpose waiting for you. It may be difficult, and you may not fully understand it at first, but the moment you allow God to remove the source of that conflict, you open up space for something greater, greater peace, greater clarity, and greater purpose. Think about the times when you've experienced a similar situation. Maybe it was a family member, a close friend, or a colleague who seemed to bring more stress than support. There may have been a point where you felt emotionally drained every time you spoke to them, a heaviness in your heart that didn't go away. This tension wasn't just a passing feeling, it was a sign, a divine nudge that God was asking you to reevaluate the relationship. It may not have been an easy choice to make, but in retrospect, you can probably see how God used that discomfort to guide you into something better. As much as we may love people, we have to trust that God loves us more. His plan for us is greater than any human relationship or connection. If the relationship causes more confusion than clarity, more division than unity, then God is giving you the opportunity to walk away in order to grow. Sometimes the greatest act of love we can show ourselves and the other person is to let go and allow God to intervene. When you experience conflict and tension that doesn't seem to resolve, ask yourself, is this relationship helping me grow into the person God is calling me to be? If the answer is no, recognize that God may be using the tension to protect you, to guide you away from something that is not aligned with His greater purpose for your life. Sign 2, emotional drain and lack of peace. One of the most profound ways God speaks to us is through our emotional state. There is a reason why the Bible tells us in Philippians 4:7, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Peace isn't just the absence of noise or conflict. It is the presence of clarity, rest, and balance in our souls. When we are at peace, we are in a place where God's voice is clear and His presence is tangible. But when that peace is robbed from us, when we feel emotionally drained in a relationship, it's not just an inconvenience. It's a wake-up call from God. God has designed us to live in peace, to be emotionally and spiritually restored. But when someone or something begins to drain that peace from us consistently, we must pay attention. That emotional exhaustion we feel isn't always a result of our own stress or fatigue. It's often a sign that we are being impacted by the negativity, toxicity, or misalignment of a relationship. It's as if a weight is placed on our spirit that no amount of rest can remove. We feel tired not just in our bodies, but in our hearts, our minds, and our souls. There are individuals who, despite their best intentions, carry with them a certain energy that is emotionally exhausting. They may be negative, manipulative, or self-centered, always taking more than they give, never offering the encouragement or support we need. When we're around them, our energy is drained. We find ourselves constantly trying to keep things together, offering emotional labor without receiving it in return. This type of emotional drain can be subtle, but over time it takes a toll on our well-being, erodes our sense of peace, and diminishes our capacity to hear from God. I remember a woman named Jessica who shared her struggle with a colleague she had worked alongside for years. At first, everything seemed fine. They would have lunch together, attend work events, and share personal stories. But soon Jessica noticed that every conversation with her colleague left her feeling drained, like her emotional battery was running on empty. Her colleague often complained, criticized others, and sought constant validation. At first, Jessica tried to brush it off, telling herself that her colleague just needed a little encouragement. But the situation only worsened. The constant emotional weight of the negativity began to affect her work performance, her mood, and even her health. She began to dread coming into the office, and her once joyful spirit was clouded with stress and frustration. It wasn't long before Jessica realized that her colleague's emotional drain wasn't just a coincidence. God was showing her something deeper. Every time they interacted, she left the conversation feeling worse about herself, about her work, and about the world around her. She no longer had the energy to invest in her own growth, her family, or her passions. The emotional drain was stealing her peace, and it was a sign that God was trying to get her attention. When Jessica took a step back and evaluated the situation, she realized that this relationship, although it seemed harmless at first, was slowly pushing her further from God's peace. God wasn't necessarily calling her to cut the person off entirely, but he was showing her that the dynamic needed to change. She began setting boundaries, limiting the amount of emotional energy she invested in that relationship and prioritizing her peace. Slowly, her emotional well-being was restored, and she was able to reconnect with her deeper purpose. In relationships where we feel emotionally drained, it's essential to recognize that God desires to restore our peace. There is a difference between walking with someone through challenges and being perpetually drained by their inability to find peace themselves. When someone consistently takes more than they give and the relationship feels it's a sign that God may be calling you to protect your own emotional health. God has equipped us with a spirit of resilience, but he never meant for us to constantly bear the weight of others' unresolved emotional turmoil. Our calling is to love and support, but not at the expense of our own peace. In Matthew 11:28-30, Jesus offers us an invitation to find rest. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. If you find yourself in a relationship that continually robs you of that rest, it's time to pause and ask God what he is revealing through that emotional drain. Is this person meant to be in your life for the long haul, or are they simply there for a season, teaching you how to set boundaries, prioritize peace, and guard your heart? Take the example of Kevin, a young man who had been in a relationship with a woman named Laura for several years. Initially, Laura's love and attention seemed like a gift. However, over time, Kevin began to notice that whenever they were together, he felt emotionally drained. Laura constantly needed reassurance, was quick to anger, and frequently placed blame on Kevin for things that weren't his fault. Her lack of emotional maturity made him feel as if he was walking on eggshells, always trying to keep the peace. No matter how much he tried to help her, he felt like nothing was ever enough. This constant emotional strain began to impact Kevin's work, his friendships, and his relationship with God. Kevin loved Laura, but the emotional toll was undeniable. He tried to ignore it, telling himself that things would improve with time. But as the relationship wore on, he began to experience anxiety, sleepless nights, and a deep sense of spiritual unrest. He prayed for clarity, asking God to guide him in his relationship with Laura. Through prayer and reflection, Kevin began to realize that God was using the lack of peace in his life to show him that the relationship was not aligned with his will. It was a painful realization, but Kevin knew that if he didn't address the emotional drain caused by the relationship, he would continue to move further away from the peace that God desired for him. He eventually made the difficult decision to end the relationship. It wasn't easy, but as soon as he did, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace return. Kevin realized that sometimes, in order to protect your peace, you have to let go of relationships that consistently drain you. When you find yourself emotionally drained in a relationship, take a moment to reflect. Is this relationship contributing to my emotional well-being or depleting it? God does not want you to sacrifice your peace, your joy, or your ability to hear His voice for the sake of maintaining unhealthy connections. Recognize the signs, take the necessary steps to protect your emotional health, and trust that God's peace will guide you into deeper clarity and understanding. Sign 3, divine disruption in your plans. There are moments in life when everything seems to be going according to plan, and then suddenly, without warning, your world is disrupted. It could be an unexpected fallout, a sudden change in circumstances, or an abrupt shift in the direction of your life. These disruptions often feel chaotic, leaving us confused and questioning God's timing. But what if, instead of a setback, this disruption is a divine redirection? What if God is using this interruption to remove someone from your life who is not meant to walk with you into the next season of your destiny? God has a way of intervening in our lives, not when we're doing something wrong, but often when we are in a place that's limiting us from walking into the fullness of our purpose. In Isaiah 55, 8-9, God says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." Our understanding of what's good for us is limited, and sometimes our attachment to people or situations that seem right in the moment can blind us to God's greater plan. God disrupts our comfort to get our attention. These disruptions, although painful, often serve as an invitation to trust His plan, even when it doesn't make sense at the time. Take, for example, a woman named Emma. She had been in a long-term friendship with a woman named Rachel. They had been through so much together: childhood memories, high school drama, college struggles, and every major milestone in between. Rachel was someone Emma had always relied on, and they shared an unspoken understanding. It seemed like their lives were always intertwined, but over time, Emma started noticing subtle changes. Rachel had become increasingly distant, often canceling plans or showing up late. When they did hang out, it felt like the conversations were shallow and Rachel was distracted. Emma tried to brush it off, assuming that Rachel was just busy with her own life. Yet the more Emma tried to reach out, the more distant Rachel became. Then one day, Emma received a message from Rachel, something that left her feeling devastated. Rachel was moving across the country and would be leaving for good. Emma was blindsided. They hadn't even discussed it. It felt like a betrayal. Why hadn't Rachel told her earlier? Why hadn't they talked about it? Emma was hurt, confused, and unsure of how to process it. This sudden disruption in their friendship was painful, but it also forced Emma to confront something deeper. It wasn't just the physical distance that was changing. Something had shifted in their relationship. The bond they once shared had been unraveling for some time, and Emma hadn't been willing to see it. She had ignored the signs, the tension in their conversations, the lack of emotional investment, the drifting apart. The disruption in Emma's life was God's way of removing someone who had become a roadblock in her journey. Rachel's presence, though once a source of comfort, had now become a distraction, pulling Emma away from her true purpose. Emma realized that she had been holding on to a past relationship, one that no longer aligned with the person she was becoming. God was using this disruption to guide her toward a future that was better suited to her calling. We often look at disruptions as inconveniences or setbacks, but sometimes these are divine setups. When we are too attached to someone or something, God will intervene in ways that seem jarring to our plans. The job we thought was our dream job may fall through. The relationship that seemed promising may suddenly take a turn. Or an opportunity that we thought would bring us success may close before we even step into it. These disruptions are not random. They are God's way of realigning us with the greater purpose He has for us. He sees things we don't. He knows what we need before we even ask for it. Think of David in the Bible. David was anointed king as a young shepherd boy, but the journey to the throne was full of divine disruptions. He faced rejection, betrayal, and even years of running for his life from King Saul, the very man he had served faithfully. At many points, David's plans seemed to be falling apart. But each disruption was a divine setup for him to walk into his purpose. If David had not been pursued and hunted by Saul, he would not have learned the lessons that prepared him to be a wise and just king. God used those moments of disruption to break David free from his dependence on his own strength and to teach him to rely fully on God's timing. Now consider how these divine disruptions play out in our own lives. For many of us, we may experience a sudden shift in a relationship, a career, or even a dream we've held for years. At first, it feels like chaos. We may question God, asking why things are falling apart when we've done everything right. But in these moments, we must remember that God sees the bigger picture. He knows the next season of our lives. Sometimes the best thing He can do for us is to remove something or someone who is holding us back. Think of a young man named Mark who had been in a romantic relationship for years. They had talked about marriage, building a family, and growing old together, but suddenly, without warning, his partner began to change. There were emotional outbursts, growing distance, and a lack of communication. Mark felt lost. How could this relationship, which had seemed so promising, suddenly turn so cold? He tried to salvage it, tried to talk it out, but nothing worked. Then, out of nowhere, his partner ended things. Mark was devastated. His entire future had been built around this person, and now everything felt like it was falling apart. In the midst of his pain, Mark turned to God, asking for clarity. Slowly, he began to realize that the relationship, while meaningful at the time, was not meant to last. The emotional turmoil he had experienced in that relationship was draining his spirit and pulling him away from his dreams. God was using the disruption to reveal that Mark's future was not tied to that person, but to something greater. Through the heartbreak, Mark discovered his purpose. He learned that in order to walk fully into his destiny, he needed to let go of the relationship that no longer aligned with his calling. Mark's story isn't unique. Many of us have experienced moments where the relationships, jobs, or dreams we once thought were our future are suddenly taken away. And though the pain is real, we must trust that God is guiding us. What seems like a disruption in our lives could very well be a divine redirection, preparing us for the greater purpose He has planned. Just like the Israelites wandering in the wilderness, what feels like a detour is often the path that leads to our promised land. God uses the disruptions to align us with His perfect timing, to open new doors, and to guide us toward a future we may not have even imagined. When disruptions happen, remember that God's ways are higher than ours. Trust that He knows exactly what you need, even when it seems like your life is falling apart. In moments of conflict, emotional drain, and divine disruption, it's easy to question God's timing and His purpose. But through each of these signs, God is not punishing us or abandoning us. Rather, He is guiding us toward the life He has designed for us, one filled with peace, growth, and purpose. The people who are meant to be in our lives will align with God's greater plan for us. And sometimes those who are not will be removed, not as a form of rejection, but as an invitation to step into something better. When you feel the weight of conflict, when the peace is slowly drained from your heart, or when everything you've built begins to crumble unexpectedly, remember that these moments are part of a larger divine strategy. God is not only concerned with where you are right now, but with where you are going. His plan for your life is bigger, broader, and more beautiful than you could ever imagine. In the face of these signs, your response is crucial. Will you resist the changes and hold on to what's comfortable? Or will you trust God and let go of the things and people who are no longer meant for you? The decision is not always easy, but it's in those moments of surrender that we begin to see God's hand at work, guiding us toward a future that is far more fulfilling than we could have ever crafted for ourselves. So embrace the journey. Trust that the disruptions are not hindrances, but invitations to grow. Let go of what God is asking you to release and step boldly into the new season He has for you. In the end, everything He removes is part of the divine preparation for the greater purpose He is unfolding in your life. Keep walking, keep trusting, and know that with each step, God is with you, leading you into something far greater than you could ever have imagined.